Our State of the U.S. segment tonight, President Trump announced on Twitter yesterday that transgender people will not be allowed to serve in the military in any capacity, reversing a decision made by former Defense Secretary Ash Carter in June of 2016 that allowed trans individuals to serve openly. Now liberals are predictably accusing Trump of transphobia. But how exactly is this discrimination when the military also excludes people with a variety of other expensive pre-existing medical conditions? But of course, none of that matters to liberals who are up on their soapbox again, making ridiculous, unsubstantiated claims. Watch.
Once again, President Trump has shown his conduct is driven not by honor, decency, or national security, but by raw prejudice.
I'm sorry, but he's a psychopath, and he's delusional.
But this is a major, major setback for us. It seems like everywhere you turn around, there are people discriminating against the trans community for one reason or another, and none of it makes sense.
With me now, former transgender, speaker, and author of Paper Genders, Walt Heyer. Walt, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, Walt, you had a very interesting piece on the Federalist today. Very well done, great work. You talk about your life. You were born male, you transitioned to being a female, and then transitioned back. You said from that perspective that you think President Trump banning transgenders from serving in the military is the right thing to do. Why is that?
Well, first off, the military gets to choose who's in the military, not transgenders. They don't get to choose who's in the military. The other thing is that we have, a lot of veterans who need a lot of medical care in our VA hospitals. And why are we going to be spending $1 billion or $2 billion or whatever it is on transgender surgery when we have veterans who served with honor and distinction that can't get medical care in a hospital?
Right, and that's a good point. I mean, that's certainly where I come, how I'm coming at the issue, that it is a medical issue. It's certainly, I don't consider it to be discriminatory because I think it is about a pre-existing condition that costs the taxpayers a lot of money, and the military's primary goal is not to be a social experiment. It's fighting, it's killing, it's destroying, it's winning wars, and there's no proof that this is necessary.
That's exactly right. And the science still isn't completely resolved on the issue of whether transgender surgery, people who identify as a transgender person, whether the surgery and hormones are actually effective. For the last 12 years, I've been helping people detransition because the surgery didn't work for them. So one of the questions that people need to ask is the military really willing to reattach body parts that they cut off if, in fact, they were to engage in doing sex change surgeries? Because many of these people regret it. We know 40% of them attempt suicide because the hormones and surgery are not effective in resolving the deeper comorbid psychological disorders that exist that cause people to identify as a transgender person.
Right, which I think it is worth noting. I mean, you mentioned that suicide rate. The suicide rate for transgenders, not just in the military, but in our country, is extremely high. Mental illness is very rampant within the transgender community, and that in and of itself, not even gender identity, but mental illness is generally a disqualifier from military service to begin with. But Walt, let me ask you, a lot of people on the left, or a lot of people who oppose this ban from President Trump, are comparing this to when our military was segregated, or when black people weren't allowed to serve in the same unit as white people, or when gay people were disallowed from serving openly in the military. Do you consider this ban to be the same as those?
Well, I don't know any black person that's ever had to undergo surgery to become black. So I don't know how we can compare this with that. This is a whole different ball of wax. We have a group of people who, for whatever reason, have identified as a transgender person. And what I know from the 12 years that I've been working with them, that they are suffering deeply from emotional, psychological, and some of them sexual disorders like autogynephilia. And these people who suffer these sexual disorders are certainly not appropriate to be in the military.
So you don't consider it to be discriminatory against the trans community? Because I'm sure, as we all are, but particularly you, because you were part of it at one point in your life, have a great deal of empathy for people who are struggling with mental health, who are struggling with gender dysphoria. You don't consider it to be discriminatory against these people, that they're not allowed to serve even if they want to?
Well, I think it's discriminatory if you don't offer them the help they need. And putting them in the military, putting them in a dangerous position and not providing the psychological and emotional care that they need is what's discriminatory. We need to help them. That's what I do. I help people all the time. and they reach out to me and they want to detransition back. So what's the military going to do when these people are dissatisfied with having done the surgery or the hormones? That's why I think Trump did the right thing. It's just not something, like you said, it's not a place for social experimentation with gender. People should have those issues resolved before they ever enter the military. The military should not be a federally funded sex change clinic.
Right. And I think, too, people neglect to see the point that the military sometimes is not equipped to handle certain types of medical conditions, and this is one of them. I mean, the handbook right now, the medical handbook of disqualifying conditions, is about this thick. It's 2 inches thick of all these different kinds of things, from flat feet to color blindness to obvious things that, you know, that would be dangerous, like HIV or heart disease, to things like ingrown toenails or pregnancy. I mean, there are so many things that could disqualify you from a military career simply because the actual gender identity or sexual orientation, that is not necessarily the distraction that President Trump was talking about. Any medical condition that requires you to have extensive care can be a distraction to the mission of the military, which is, again, to win wars.
That's right. And transgenders by design, people who identify as a transgender person by design, have deep anxiety and depression disorders that need to be addressed 100% of the time. Gender dysphoria is the opposite of euphoria. So they are gender depressed. So why would we want somebody in the military who's suffering from anxiety and depression? That's not the way we start people out on a path to becoming a strong military soldier.
Right. And one last thing, Walt, before we go, I appreciate you so much coming on the show. You say you work with a lot of transgender people who reach out to you for help. How can they get in touch with you?
My website, sexchangeregret.com. And if they want to learn about the history of transgender surgeries, they should get my book, Paper Genders.
Right, and I encourage everyone watching this segment right now to go to the Federalist and read your article. It's a fascinating read, like you said, on the history and the science of it, not just the emotional soapbox that everyone's made this issue to be the last day or two.